Just when I thought that I wasn't going to see anything worth shooting, a buck, worthy of the cover of a Field and Stream magazine, began to strut out into the open, and the only thing I could think of as I was drawing my bow was the scripture that says that pride goeth before a fall, because this one looked awfully pleased with himself. I let the arrow fly, and it hit the buck through the side. There's no way that it had missed his lungs. He bounded away, but I knew it was only a matter of time. After all, hunting in Texas is a mixed bag. Sometimes, you feel like you're in the Amazon, while other times you feel like you're in the Sahara. This was one of the more desert-like landscapes. I had a wide-open view of my prey, and he seemed to have known that, because he went straight down for the mouth of a very small cavern. Unless that little pocket of underground air led into a huge complicated system, it almost wasn't even worth knocking another arrow. All I would have to do is go in with my buck knife and finish the job. Sorry, but yes, I can be one of those hunters. I didn't have a chance to fully put away my bow, because the deer came running out of the cave with a renewed speed. Something that looked like a cross between an oversized hawk and a man had its talons dug into its back, and it was trying for all of its worth to take off with this buck in the air. But, like an owl that tries to pick up a goat, the monstrosity had clearly bitten off more than it could chew. While it was wrangling the deer, I got a pretty good look at the scene in front of me. This creature only bore a rudimentary resemblance to a human being. The rest was straight up some kind of animal that I couldn't correctly categorize. The face came close to a bat, if a leaf-nosed bat had escaped some mad scientist gallery of failed experiments. This thing was way bigger than it should have been. Its overall cast suggested that it wasn't used to standing up straight, but if it had, I feel like it could have easily been 7 feet tall. It flapped tattered and leathery wings madly, trying to carry off its oversized cargo to wherever its lair was. That's when I had suddenly lost interest in bagging that deer, and instead wanted to try and make a trophy out of whatever the hell this was. I attempted to steady my nerves and shrug off the shock of seeing this thing. Everything about it brought back everything I had ever seen and heard, in connection with things like hell, vampires, Dante's Inferno, everything in between. The creature must have been smarter than I gave it credit for, because when it saw me draw my arrow back, it knew, or seemed to know, that I was aiming at it, and it then abandoned the deer, flying upwards. My arrow gouged a new hole in its already damaged wing, but it cried out and beelined for my head. I was just fast enough to duck, and got a fresh, deep wound from my ear to my eyebrow. That's when I could feel hot blood running down my face. It attempted 2 more passes at me, each one inflicting another deep wound. I knew I wasn't going to be able to hunker down and wait for the whole thing out. So, I brought up my buck knife again, and the next time it came for me, I slashed at it. I do hit something. I don't know what. There was a scream, and it made my blood go cold. I felt a warm hot liquid that wasn't mine splashing over my hands. It circled a few feet above me before flying off. That's when I finally collapsed. I looked over to the deer and saw that it had finally succumbed to its own wounds. That's when I finally got to assess just how badly I was hurt. And, unfortunately, I was in worse shape than I had thought. I wasn't ready to kneel over dead anytime soon. Still, I thought better of taking the extra time to take the deer home. Instead, I went straight home and saw to my injuries. I just didn't feel for the deer as strongly as I had before. The more impressive trophy had gotten away, and I can't remember the last time I was deathly afraid of that very thing that I was hunting to make a trophy out of. Maybe someday I'll gather up the gumption to go out there specifically after that thing. I do remember the cave that it came out of. It shouldn't be too hard to find again. Wish me luck, and hope I don't die. I know this might sound strange to you, but I prefer to call myself a professional exorcist. I'm also an atheist. As long as I don't mention the last detail when I'm on the job, people never catch on. You don't have to necessarily be religious to burn sage and chant a bunch of stuff that you got written down, and just simply perform a few little theatrics to indicate that you can feel the evil leaving the premises. Besides, a child actor could easily do the same things that I do and land a steady job. There was one incident on the job where, very briefly, I wasn't an atheist. You'll never get me to admit that, though, in person. Going back, I got a phone call from what sounded like a very frantic old man. It turned out it was actually a Catholic priest that headed a church not very far away from where I live. For all his divine authority, he was having trouble with an entity that just wasn't giving him the respect his office commanded, and even held fast to his audacity to squat in the church's upper chambers. I told him, refusing to call him father, I was not an altar boy with daddy issues. What manner of creature do you need to exorcise? He then told me with gusto that it was a demon from hell, how it had terrible curved horns, tattered wings. I almost suggested that he take its pitchfork from it and ram it through its neck. I was hungover, wasn't in the mood, and thought he was pulling my leg. But paying work is paying work, I thought, so I agreed to come out and see what I could do about one of Satan's mini-me's. I thought that maybe the priest was ribbing me with a little bit of over-the-top theatrical humor. That's when he took me inside the church, led me to the stairwell that led into the upper levels. He was very reluctant to go up there with me. He told me that the demon was not to be underestimated, as it had already tried to make off with some of the children in the congregation. I was just barely able to restrain myself from saying that I would trust a demon with my children before I would trust him. I breached the upper levels with an electric torch. Indeed, it hadn't looked like people had been up there for a very long time, and yet there was slightly disturbed feel to it that hinted that there was regular movement of some kind, not just from people. I set about burning sage and parading some smudged sticks throughout those cold, dark halls. I was about to begin the ritualistic prayers of sanctification when a shrilling cry pierced my ears. My apathy and attitude evaporated nearly instantly. Turning around just in time to see a great blackness with two red eyes rushing toward me from down the dark hallway. This was right before I was knocked to the floor. My lantern lit up the thing's horrible view. The LED light turned its long fangs to a blue. I landed on my back, and the wind was nearly knocked out of me. There was a great flapping above me, and it sounded like thunder, and something cut into my sides. My attacker disappeared down the other end of the hallway, and I scrambled to then get myself together. I was bleeding from my sides where great claws had clamped down on me. I suddenly understood why the priest looked and sounded like a frightened child. Now, I'm a walking collection of warding holy relics at any given moment, and this thing wasn't deterred in the least. I felt exposed. Imposter syndrome. The simple fact that I was suddenly thinking of things I was carrying as holy, and possibly actually having protection, told me that the religion virus was seeping into my brain, which only made me even more afraid. I pulled out my Glock, and not a moment too soon. The horrible shadow was coming back up from the direction it came, and my shots lit up the hallway with the only light around. This thing screamed out and veered to the right, where a stained glass window let colored moonlight seep in. The glass shattered, and I heard it take off. I don't know if it scrambled, jumped off, or flew off. I don't know where it went, but it never came back. I don't know if I necessarily got rid of it, but I certainly chased it off. That particular church's business of having to deal with that was at an end. My faith in nothing was restored when I contemplated how the bullet seemed to do a lot more than anything else I kept on me. It also led me to contemplate further that the creature probably hadn't come from hell at all, but possibly some dark corners of the earth, where things like it were left undisturbed and allowed to breed and live in relative peace from seclusion of humanity's